This is Art Sense, a podcast focused on educating and informing listeners about the past, present, and future of art. I'm Craig Gould. On today's episode, I speak with the iconic American artist Hunt Slonem. Slonem is known worldwide for his brightly colored neo-expressionist paintings packed full of either birds, bunnies, or butterflies. His work is highly collectible and can be found in the collections of the Whitney, the Guggenheim, and MoMA. So sit back and get to know Hunt Slonem and his love of things. Hunt Slonem, thank you so much for joining me today on the Art Sense podcast. Hunt, with artists, I usually like to start with a hypothetical, which is if by chance you were at a dinner party and the person seated next to you had no idea who Hunt Slonem was or no knowledge of your work, how would you describe what you do and what your work looks like to them?
I probably would say very little because I don't want to push myself on others. It depends on who it is. Let's start with it that way. I would say that my work deals with nature. It's completely derived from flora and fauna. I love the word exotica to kind of sum up my interest on this planet. I am a painter. I've been painting for 60 plus years. And I show all over creation, and I have lived in New York since the 70s, and I continue to, and I have a fascination with old houses, kind of vestiges of grandeur is a favorite term of mine, to quote Richard Sexton's book from Louisiana. And that's part of my process. I was inspired by Picasso as a child by his buying all these chateaus, filling them up with work, and locking the door and moving to the next one. And I've been up to 8 historic homes at one time. I've never parted with any until COVID started. Anyway, but I'm living and working in New York, and I'm also starting during COVID. I have begun working in more sculpture. I'm doing a lot of glass work and metal work and all kinds of new activities with big plans for shows and botanical gardens coming up starting in 2024.
We talk about referring to your work as Exotica. I feel like some of that comes from your childhood, a child of a military family. You kind of moved around to different places that kind of gave you a view of different sort of lifestyles and fauna and
cultures and religions. And, I grew up in Hawaii for a very formative period of my life, and went to school with kids from Samoa and Fiji and Japan and China and Hawaiians, and many languages were spoken, and we had Japanese neighbors, and I used to hang out with the grandfather, and he had a kind of amazing gardens that he'd had for half a century or more, and I learned so much about plants and my love of orchids. I mean, everything I paint comes out of those experiences. I kept birds as a child in Hawaii. I was influenced by Queen Liliuokalani's palace, which had full of gothic-revival furniture, which continues to be a great passion of mine. And the act of picking plumerias and orchids for lei making when visitors would arrive. There was a funny story. Somebody did a piece in New York on people who'd grown up in Hawaii a bit, and I'm trying to think of her name, Dunbarton Oaks and Mar-a-Lago, who built that. I'm trying to remember her name. Anyway, they lived in Hawaii. And when they would go there, the queen would cover them with leis to the point that they couldn't see. They were cut over their heads. It's kind of Hawaiian hospitality. And the flowers of each place, the pikaki flower of Hawaii is just unlike anything else on earth. And these memories hung with me and mesmerized me and kept me through some of the difficult moments of submarine launchings and Polaris missile buildings that I was surrounded with. And then there were all these great mystical days, King Kamehameha Day, and I was so excited about the Hawaiian king's cloaks that took 300 years to make out of the mamo bird tail feathers, which are now extinct. And I've done a lot of installations with molted feathers of my birds based on that early endeavor or viewing of all of that. And then I was an exchange student in Nicaragua in high school, which, the wildlife of Central America surrounds me to this day. I had up to 16 pet toucans at one point.
All at the same time?
Yeah.
Wow. You need a pretty big studio to hold 15 toucans, right?
Well, I had a 40-foot aviary in one of my studios. Unfortunately, soft-billed birds, which are my favorite, only live to 20, and you're lucky if they do. So I've been here since 73, so I've been through quite a few life cycles, and the parrots make it forever. They can live to 100.
I think I heard you say that for your 16th birthday, somebody gave you an Ocelot pelt, and that is still
family I lived with.
Is still something that you kind of take inspiration from.
Yeah, I hold it in my hand and paint from it. I would never have one killed, but I derived great inspiration from looking at it and living around it. And I've done a huge series of paintings of ocelots over the years. I was also given a 20-foot anaconda skin. I don't know why, but anyway, my dream was always to go back there and found a national museum, but I don't know that that's going to happen. I kind of parked myself in Louisiana as an alternative, a little closer, and
or at least find a house in Nicaragua to fill up with things, right?
Well, I've never been back. I haven't been back since 1969. I went back a second time right before I went to school in Mexico for a year. Anyway, I've never been back since the revolution. Somoza was in power when I was there. And I went to Colegio, Central America.
And was that before you went to Tulane, or was that kind of in the middle?
Oh, yeah, before. Yeah, in the middle, between Vanderbilt and Tulane.
Was that a culture shock for you, having lived in these exotic locations, then winding up in Nashville and New Orleans?
I have Southern roots. My grandmother was from Chattanooga, my great-grandfather, and all that. And I have relatives all over the South. I used to visit the South, traveling from coast to coast periodically. But going to school at Vanderbilt my freshman year, I'd been in high school in Washington State, I would say it was the biggest culture shock I've ever experienced.
New Orleans seems a little bit more mystical, which kind of matches your vibe, right?
It's mystical, it's French, it has a history of, being built by very aristocratic people with very refined taste in architecture and painting. And, well, I shouldn't go too far. There are plenty of bad things too. But I actually own a house that I studied in college. It was built by Henry Howard. I took Louisiana architecture as an elective, and that was fascinating. Anyway, I wanted this house for 30 years, and I finally got it.
When you left Tulane, you studied at Skowhegan for a summer, right?
Right.
And so for those that don't understand how special Skowhegan is, can you kind of describe what's going on out there on the farm?
Well, it's in Maine, which is the state I was born in by chance. I was born on an island when my dad was at MIT. And so it's near Waterville, Maine. It's inland. And it was founded by the Cummings family, Bill Willard Cummings, and his sister, Johnny Franson, who I adored, and Jack Eastman. And it just started out, Ellsworth Kelly was involved, Robert Indiana went there, Alex Katz went there. It has a history of only, I think, 30 people a summer went there. It was quite unique, and they had just killer staff. The summer I was there, Louise Nevelson came, Alice Neal was a guest, Alex Katz came, Richard Estes, Betty Davis was there for 3 weeks. But it was a very small group, and I had a lot of interesting experiences there as well, mystically and artistically, and it really just hooked me into New York. And I had been so remotely educated in places that weren't really, there was no art focus. Now Vanderbilt does have a program, they merged with Peabody, but Tulane did. Anyway, I just moved to New York after school. I was told, don't go to graduate school, just move to New York. And the first 5 years were really intense and hard, but I got a bunch of grants, which was great. I got a grant from Canada, which has always been very generous to me, the Green Shields Foundation grant. And I got a NEA. And Janet Fish was very, very kind to me. I got a loft that she had gotten from Jack Beadle when she decided to move, and that kind of anchored me for a while. Then I got my first show at Fishbuck Gallery in the 70s. And anyway, I wound up being with Marlboro for 18 years. And just the experience of, kind of growing up in New York. I've lived here longer than anywhere. I've seen a lot, and my brother moved here. He was a writer, and my cousin wrote Slaves of New York. And we've met a lot of people over the years.
New York was a much different place in 1973.
It was really edgy. It wasn't all about money in those days.
When you landed in New York, did you know anyone in New York? I mean, were there folks from Skowhegan?
Yeah.
Okay, so you had a handful of people in an artist community. And so what is it, 4 or 5 years before you were able to make those inroads in the gallery scene?
Well, even making inroads in the gallery scene does not assure you of making money.
Right.
But I worked for the Cultural Council Foundation Artists Project, which was the recreation of the WPA. I was very lucky to be selected for that. There were only 300 of us out of all the city, and there were writers and poets and artists and weavers, and I got to do murals for the World Trade Center. I did something for Port Authority on 43rd floor of Tower 1, which was quite an experience. Joan Mondale came and inaugurated those. I did saints for churches in Brooklyn. I did murals for schools in Harlem and Brooklyn, and just we were busy making public art.
In 1975, 1976, 77, what did your art look like at that time?
Very flat.
Okay. And, is that where you started working with saints? I mean, was your work figurative? What would we have seen?
Always figurative. I went through a big transition in the late 70s into the 80s where I started painting animals